Somewhere in the Piermont substation, a cadaver of a building, every fluorescent tube long since punched out, the transmitter breathes. Not hums. Breathes. Like a man who smoked too much and still won the fight. Ozone hangs in the air like a confession nobody asked for. Hand-labeled vinyl spins under a single neon tube, the color of a wound that won't close. Cables patched with electrical tape and old faith. Outside, 1966. Inside the skull of this signal, 2036.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Across Mount Emily Park, the dial sits at 82 Fahrenheit, under partly cloudy. Wind check, southeast at 15 miles an hour. We're tracking a structural disconnect in Thetford, where the speed of centralized policy, while perhaps efficient on paper, hollows out the bedrock of local consent and community dignity. The signal is clear. When decisions are made without the people, the very fabric of civic architecture begins to fray, leading to widespread confusion and a breakdown of trust.
In Thetford, the Home Office's decision to house 50 asylum seekers at the Thomas Paine Hotel, a former 4-star establishment, without any meaningful prior consultation with the local council or residents, ignited 5 consecutive days of escalating protests. These culminated in property damage to the hotel, including a smashed window and clashes between local residents and counter-protesters. This unilateral imposition has left local police deploying additional units to manage the unrest, straining civic resources and exposing both long-term residents and the newly arrived asylum seekers to fear, uncertainty, and potential hostility. The trust between the local community and central government has demonstrably eroded, creating a deep sense of disempowerment. A viable alternative would involve a preemptive, structured local engagement process, such as a community integration forum, where local government, community leaders, and Home Office representatives collaboratively identify and assess potential sites, discuss local capacities, and co-create integration strategies before any placements are made. However, the government's current move is to proceed with the allocations under existing emergency powers, prioritizing rapid deployment and relying on enhanced security measures, effectively bypassing local integration efforts and consent.
This pattern of imposed policy like a digital overlay without ground truth echoes historical failures where centralized edicts ignored the village elders' wisdom, bypassing the very people whose lives are directly impacted. We're seeing the erosion of the commons, that shared space of trust and collective decision-making, where a single, distant decision-maker overrides generations of local knowledge and social capital. The architectural signal here is one of structural violence, where the supposed efficiency of a top-down approach inadvertently shatters the dignity of a community, leaving only fractured signals for the next generation to decode. Signals of resentment, disempowerment, and a profound lack of provenance in their own civic space. It's a blueprint for division, not integration, revealing how easily logic can become divorced from the essential emotional context of human community.
Instead of imposing a solution, imagine a civic sandbox protocol, dedicating 72 hours for a local design sprint involving residents, council members, and Home Office liaisons to co-create site-specific integration plans. This isn't just a mapping exercise, it's a process of co-ownership, bending the rule of top-down efficiency to reveal a system built on shared investment, mutual understanding, and the active generation of consent. It transforms reactive anger into proactive design, empowering local autonomy and building resilient civic architecture from the ground up. This approach prioritizes long-term social cohesion over short-term logistical expediency, integrating logic with the vital emotional intelligence of a community and ensuring dignity for all involved.
Patching in a caller, the skeptic. You're on the signal.
A civic sandbox? That sounds ideal, perhaps even utopian. But how do you prove that would genuinely prevent mob rule or even facilitate faster, more successful integration? What's the empirical basis for delaying immediate housing for what sounds like a slow, consultative mapping exercise? Give me data, not just a concept that sounds good on paper. Are we sacrificing urgent humanitarian need for the sake of abstract consent? It sounds like more bureaucracy, not less.
Good question, caller, demanding evidence and challenging the presumed efficiency of alternative models. While direct comparative data on preventing unrest with preemptive community mapping is admittedly nascent, we observe the inverse. Cases like Thetford, where the absence of consultation demonstrably generates significant friction, costing substantial police resources, public funds, and irrevocably damaging community trust. Studies in social psychology consistently show that perceived fairness and participation in decision-making significantly increase buy-in and reduce resistance, even when outcomes are not perfectly aligned with initial preferences. The alternative, a civic sandbox process, prioritizes long-term resilience and integration over immediate, imposed deployment, building consent and dignity as structural anchors, thereby turning potential confusion into actionable vectors. The chosen next move by authorities, however, remains immediate deployment, relying on security measures rather than community co-design, indicating a continued prioritization of top-down control over grassroots engagement. This brings us to another architecture under scrutiny, from civic consensus to global data provenance. Somewhere a capacitor creaks under the load. Hot metal. The console keeps its lights and its secrets. From local civic architectures to global data architectures, we're tracking a new tension. The World Food Programme's reported intent to extend its Palantir contract, despite internal audit concerns over privacy and cost-effectiveness. This is a critical examination of who owns the digital blueprints of aid, and whether our systems truly favor consent and dignity.
The World Food Programme, WFP, tasked with managing global food aid logistics for millions of vulnerable individuals, is reportedly finalizing a 5-year renewal of its $4.9 million contract with the U.S. data software firm Palantir. This decision comes despite a leaked 2025 internal audit, seen by PassBlue and other outlets, which flagged key privacy concerns, questioned the contract's cost-effectiveness, and highlighted issues of vendor lock-in. This exposes WFP beneficiaries, many of whom are refugees or internally displaced persons, to potential data misuse, surveillance, and a lack of control over their personal information, given Palantir's history with intelligence and military contracts. Furthermore, it exposes WFP itself to significant reputational and financial risk, undermining its mission of humanitarian aid and potentially eroding the trust of those it serves. A viable alternative would involve investing in the development of an open-source WFP-owned data analytics platform, giving the organization full control over its data, reducing reliance on proprietary systems, fostering transparency, and potentially enabling greater local ownership of data infrastructure in recipient countries. However, the chosen next move, confirmed by WFP, is to proceed with the Palantir extension, citing operational continuity and the immediate need for seamless data management, effectively prioritizing existing infrastructure over addressing critical privacy and sovereignty concerns.
This echoes an old colonial pattern, the benevolent hand of aid bringing with it unseen surveillance, a digital white man's burden that trades immediate relief for long-term data dependency. The architectural signal here is a system that extracts value not just from resources, but from the very lives it claims to save, embedding a silent ledger of vulnerability and control within the data streams. This undermines the dignity and autonomy of aid recipients, transforming them from individuals with rights into data points within a proprietary system. It's a structural issue of provenance. Who truly owns and controls the information generated by those in distress, and whose interests does that control ultimately serve? The logic of efficiency in this context risks becoming an emotional betrayal of trust, creating confusion where clarity and consent are paramount.
There's a caller on the line.
So, the WFP is prioritizing operational continuity over the fundamental data privacy and dignity of millions of vulnerable populations. Who truly benefits from this vendor lock-in with a company known for its surveillance capabilities? Is the alleged efficiency worth the cost of potentially compromised data for millions of aid recipients, particularly those fleeing persecution? What kind of precedent does this set for humanitarian operations globally? And how do we ensure the provenance of such sensitive personal information?
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
We need to fundamentally redesign the aid agreement itself, making data sovereignty a core tenet. Imagine a mandate for an open-source data clause for all humanitarian contracts, requiring data schemas, analytics tools, and even the underlying code to be freely available, auditable by independent bodies, and ideally, managed by local communities or trusted, neutral third parties. This shifts the power from the platform provider to the people receiving aid, turning what is currently a vulnerability, their data, into a shared, transparent, and resilient resource. This integrates logic with a deep respect for human dignity, ensuring data provenance is secured for those it directly impacts, and asserting unwavering autonomy over personal information. It's a move from extraction to empowerment.
Same dossier, new angle. Keep the thread tight. The Department of Justice faces its own structural challenge, as a former prosecutor sues over what he claims is wrongful termination for public criticism of a former president. This case interrogates the very boundaries of professional autonomy and the integrity of institutional walls.
J.P. Cooney, a distinguished former federal prosecutor with a national security background, has filed a significant lawsuit against the U.S. Justice Department. He alleges he was unjustly fired from his role for blog posts written as a private citizen, which contained critical comments about then-President Trump and his administration's policies. This case exposes the DOJ to severe accusations of political retaliation, undermining the perceived impartiality and autonomy of federal employees, particularly those in sensitive national security positions, to engage in protected speech. It creates a chilling effect on internal dissent and critical thinking within the federal workforce. The individuals most affected are not only Cooney, who lost his career and faces significant legal costs, but also all federal employees who might fear expressing personal views, and ultimately, the public's trust in the DOJ's nonpartisan operation and its commitment to fundamental rights. An alternative, adhering to established civil service protections and promoting institutional resilience, could have been a formal written warning, mandatory ethics training, or even a reassignment to a less public-facing role, allowing Cooney to adjust his public engagement without resorting to termination. Instead, the chosen next move is a protracted and high-stakes legal battle, with Cooney seeking reinstatement and damages, directly challenging the DOJ's internal disciplinary framework and the scope of employee speech rights.
This isn't just a legal battle. It's a structural stress test on the separation of powers and the integrity of the civic servant as an autonomous actor within the state. It evokes the town crier archetype, silenced for speaking an inconvenient truth, yet now, through litigation, becomes a modern digital scribe etching the cost of autonomy into the public record. The architectural signal here is a system grappling with its own internal compass. Does it value conformity above all else, or does it possess the structural resilience to accommodate reasoned dissent? It asks who truly owns the voice of public service, and whether the institution itself has the maturity to integrate logical critique without succumbing to emotional retaliation. When an organization silences its own critical nodes, it risks becoming brittle, losing its capacity for self-correction and true provenance, leaving a residue of fear and confusion.
Patching in a caller. Go ahead.
So, if a civil servant with a national security clearance, someone dedicated to the rule of law, can be fired for expressing political opinions as a private citizen on a blog, where exactly does the line get drawn? Are we asking our public servants to be political eunuchs, devoid of personal thought or conscience? What's the real long-term cost to institutional integrity, to the very wisdom of the DOJ when dissent is met with termination, rather than reasoned debate and internal reevaluation? How can we expect independent justice if those delivering it are afraid to speak their minds even on their own time?
We need a dissent protocol built into the very fabric of federal service. Imagine a secure, anonymized internal platform where employees can flag concerns, offer critiques, or even propose policy alternatives without fear of reprisal, with a clear, audited process for review and response by leadership. This isn't about advocating for free speech absolutism within classified operations, but about designing a robust, architecturally sound internal feedback loop that strengthens the institution by integrating diverse perspectives, rather than silencing its critical nodes. It's about building an inner architecture of integrity and trust, where autonomy and discernment are seen as assets, not threats, ensuring the provenance of institutional wisdom and turning potential internal confusion into actionable vectors for improvement.
A dissent protocol, designing for internal structural integrity and the courage to speak truth to power, even within. As we conclude, the thread running through Thetford, the WFP and the DOJ is clear. The architecture of consent, provenance, and dignity is always under construction, always demanding our sharp discernment, always requiring us to assert our unwavering autonomy to build resilient structures. We must integrate logic and emotion, and use myth, humor, and clear analysis to turn confusion into actionable vectors. Stand tall in the structure.
Play the next move.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
End transmission.